People who live rurally, what's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? My mother lives alone pretty much in the woods. Completely dark at night, no streetlights or lights from neighbors, only a small road leading up to the house. One time in the middle of the night she woke up to clear footsteps on the gravel, you know the sound, and 3 knocks on the front door. She called out hello and looked outside and nothing there, only silence. It might not be a spectacular story, but I would freak out if it was me waking up to that in the middle of the night with no other people around. Unfortunately, it's hard to explain. I was hiking down a trail with my dog in remote northern Wisconsin, when I just got a weird feeling. At the exact same time, the hackles on my dog went straight up and he began acting really anxious. About the same time, I came into a clearing in the woods, and got hit with what I can only describe as a sound wave. It was like someone was blasting a subwoofer right next to me, but there was nothing around. The nearest road was maybe a mile away. Something told me to get the fuck out of there. So I quickly turned around and hiked as quickly as possible the rest of the way back. I didn't hear that bass sound after I left the clearing, but I still felt like something was following me. Semi-rural Australia, I wouldn't say can't explain, but I do get mighty annoyed at the amount of bullet holes I keep finding in shed iron, solar panels, peer-to-peer radio dishes and so on. The holes are often tumbled or keyhole as well, so I don't think it's fuckwits shooting directly, more like shooting at a 45 degrees angle from miles away or something. It would ruin my serenity to get beamed by a random bullet. Opposite side of the world, but similar experience in Pennsylvania, USA. Woke up at 5:30 one morning to the sounds of World War III starting. Shotgun pellets landing on the metal roof and falling into the gutters. It was apparently the first day of duck season and some hicks had set up in the stream 50 yards from our cabin. We went out and gave them an earful. They told us to fuck off. We called the game commission, they got cited. It wasn't a great day for anyone. 15 years ago I had a seasonal job with the U.S. Forest Service in western Colorado for the summer. I was living in an old ranger station by myself. One night I had a dream that someone was walking around the cabin while I was in bed. When I woke up that morning, the front door was wide open. For the rest of the summer I slept with a large knife close by. I grew up on a small property in regional Australia. We lived about 3 to 4 kilometers out of town, so not super far, but also far enough that we never really get disturbed. On top of that, we were on a dead-end street, down the end of another street off of the main road, so not once have I ever seen a pedestrian near my house. Anyway, one night when I was about 12, I was watching TV when 2 of my brothers came downstairs and said, "Did you hear that?" I was pretty glued to the TV so didn't hear a thing, but apparently they heard footsteps outside and a couple of hushed voices. Seeing as how my brothers were both around 20 and both big rugby playing dudes, their plan was for me to wait inside, while they ran outside and tackled anybody they could find before calling the cops. So they both sprinted out the front door at the same time, splitting in different directions to wrap around the house and meet again on the other side, presumably each with a criminal wrapped in a headlock under their arm. If you've ever seen that movie Signs where Mel Gibson and Joaquin Phoenix run around the house, basically just picture that. Anyway, they never found them. Swear to this day that they heard voices, but nobody was ever seen. Our property has a lot of thick bushland right up to the house, so all we can think is that when my brothers came out, these guys just dissolved back into the bush and watched, then probably just took off once the coast was clear again. The whole thing scared the hell out of me. I was camping alone in the middle of the plains in North Dakota. A storm blew in and I was stuck in my tent under some trees and got a super strange feeling. I had 2 phones on me at the time, one had internet and was for navigating and the other was just for cell reception. 2013. All of a sudden, one of the phones starting ringing and I looked at the caller ID. The call was coming from my other phone which was closed and in my hand. I'm rather rural, like an hour from even a supermarket. A few months ago I was in my recliner, trying to sleep. My eyes popped open, only to see a solid black figure standing just off the corner of the chair. It bent over at the waist and turned its neck funny. It was like it was trying to get a good look at me at eye level. I panicked a bit and all I could do was yell, what? And it disappeared. Part of me thought I must have been dreaming. But then I realized that my German Shepherd was hiding underneath the foot of the recliner, something he had never done in his 6 years. He did that for the next few weeks. I'm semi-rural, village with houses and shops, but surrounded by fields. There are loads of Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments, like 1,000 in a 5-mile radius. Anyway, there is this one prehistoric grave which is open, the contents having been moved to the museum. I jumped in one time to get a photo taken and my dog, a placid old black lab, suddenly started barking with full alert mode, hackles, danger, right at me, in the burial cyst. Still shudder to remember the moment. Maybe it was a snake, I don't know. I was a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods of middle of nowhere Washington. Marie was prone to say weird things, like that her sister deceased, mother, deceased, and husband, deceased, were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by this point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods. She would tell me about how there's dangerous animals out there and I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this wasn't worrisome behavior given her health condition. I had been working with her for about 6 or 7 months when I would start waking up to her walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again I wasn't troubled by this, but she started going to a specific window and giggling. Like she was interacting with someone outside the window. When asked what she was doing, she'd say, "My mother is out there." Kind of weird, but there's a different perception in her world now. One night in dead of winter, her daughter and I are awoken to the blaring of the house's alarm system. The daughter and I checked the doors and windows, none of which seemed to be disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing is Marie. She is nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rush outside to find her while the daughter continues to search the house. No tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling/searching the woods, I start making my way back to house where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I approach the house, I see Marie. Standing outside the window she normally stood at, giggling. There's not a single footstep in the snow around her, nor is she cold to the touch. She's just standing there laughing at nothing, didn't even know she was outside. Her late-night window visits became more frequent after this, but less happy. She'd get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed to be there. Then it just stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me to not let them take me into those woods. I hope they didn't. I sleep with the windows open sometimes in winter, because I'm about 3 stories up from the ground. You can hear the deer walking through at night, because they mostly travel at night where I live. It was pretty scary at first, but over the years I got used to it. One night something sounded different. There were the deer, but there was something else in the leaves that was fast as fuck. There was the alarm snort, then some thuds, then they all started barking and running. Then there were some dragging and snorting noises. I had sweaty palms under my blanket and was terrified to move. Sometime after it stopped, I closed the windows and went to sleep. Next morning there wasn't much to see but some fresh dirt, but I learned some lessons that night. If you go out in the woods, bring a lamp and a gun. If you go, don't go alone. My girlfriend lived out in the desert boonies and I'd frequently spend the nights out there. She lived near a state penitentiary that fairly consistently had escapees. This was a time before cell phones and alerts were a thing, so whenever someone would escape, police helicopters flew over the area shouting over a megaphone. In the quiet of the open desert, it was quite jarring to be abruptly awoken by someone screaming at you from the sky. We'd all bolt out of bed to check all the locks and windows. Good times. Camping as a kid behind Buddy's house. Heard most god-awful terrifying screech. Like two pieces of metal being rubbed together. Hands absolutely trembled unzipping tent and we hauled ass to the house. Honestly, I was still scared in there too, thought something was going to come through window and get me. Probably a cougar/mountain lion I suppose, but they aren't common here at all. I grew up in rural southeast Kansas. When my friends and I were young, ages 10 to 14, we went out to a shallow creek/small forest about a mile from my best friend's house. At night, we had a few pellet/BB guns and maybe a knife between us for shenanigans, that's about it. After a few minutes of walking in the woods we all felt incredibly watched. Something was following us, but none of us could get a bead on it. Some sort of dread from our monk instincts overtook the group and we drew in close and faced outward in all directions. We hauled us out of the forest and back into the tall grass prairie that led to the house. I looked back at the tree line and believe I saw a mountain lion tail disappearing into a bush. I told my friends to stay close and we got back home safe. We talked to my friend's dad, who worked in the local parks and rec department and knew the fish and game people. He said the official story is that we do not have big cats in southeast Kansas, but there had been quiet talk of a potentially untracked male in the area. My mom lives in the woods with my young nephew. Totally dark at night, tiny house. She woke up in the middle of the night to a banging on the house. Eventually she worked up the courage to look out her bedroom window. She saw a buck, banging its head against the siding. Just backing up and rearing toward the house over and over. I live in the country, and it is weird how both my dogs will key in on something and run to a place in the yard, focused, driven, hackles up, snarling. And there is absolutely nothing there. Nothing. And they aren't looking down or digging, they look up. A few weeks later it happens again, different area of the property. On and on. Been here for years now and even the new dogs do it. Something is here with us. Rural East Texas, 1972 or 3. I was 10. My job, among other things, was to check the mailbox. My mother's Daxu and Gracie liked to make the long walk with me. One summer afternoon a coyote lay beside the mailbox and when we got closer it began jumping around like it wanted to play. Gracie started yapping and wagging her tail but I scooped her up and hightailed back home. Next day same thing. Third day I wasn't paying attention and Gracie bolted and got too close. Two larger coyotes came out of the high grass and carried her off. A couple days later I was on my way to check the mail again, because that's how shit rolled back then, and that same damn coyote was sitting in the same spot and when I got close enough it started jumping like it wanted to play with me. Note, the 11th of September 2021, we'd moved from the city a few months before and any time I went outside Gracie jumped up to go with me. Till the day she died my grandmother believed Gracie took those walks to protect me. I lived in Japan and went on a trip in the mountains with a friend of mine. On a night ramble with him in an unfamiliar area, we both happened upon a torii that was immediately met with an impassable rock face. This seemed strange to me as torii were symbolically passageways. He and I both instinctively looked up to the sky while standing before the torii and somewhere that felt close to earth a great multicolored light appeared hovering above us, letting off light almost like a gas in the full spectrum of colors, before disappearing. He and I both felt something incredibly significant had happened, but had no idea what. Very odd feeling. Was staying with my dad who lived in rural Kansas, 15 minutes from the nearest small town, an hour from a bigger city. He lived on an acre of property with the house being towards the front of it. One night I had to return a shovel or something we had been using to the shed that was in the back of the property, right along a wooded area with a creek running through it. I should mention the home was previously owned by puppy breeders although the conditions looked like it could have been a puppy mill. Either way, wildlife was constantly being spotted in this area, and we figured plenty of predators realized this was at one time a food source for them. So one night I was taking the shovel back to the shed when it was dark out. I had a floodlight on so I could see my way. When I got to the shed, I started to hear a low growl very, very close to me. Considering the forested and brush-filled area was only feet away from me, something could have easily been in there watching me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I was almost frozen until I realized I just needed to get out. I kept the shovel with me and walked backwards all the way to the house. I told my dad what had happened and why I still had the shovel, and he basically just said that's okay, we'll get it tomorrow, which seemed odd because he was a very no excuses kind of guy. Makes me wonder if he saw something there previously. 8 years old, in very, 45 miles away from the nearest anything on top of a mountain, rural Appalachia, I was sitting on my couch with my dad at around 9 p.m. in winter, with freshly fallen snow, watching of all things Sightings, an old 90s show about alien encounters which scared the absolute shit out of me anyway, and we heard a knock 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 on the window. Keep in mind it's pitch black outside, so whatever could see us but we couldn't see them. Dad told me to sit right there with the telephone beside me, and he ran outside with a mag light to go see what it was. He locked the door behind him and he had explicit instructions that if he didn't come back in 5 minutes to call the police. I was terrified. He went around the house and came back in, downplayed it saying it must have been an animal, but directly after all of this, he took the long-corded phone in the other room and called his best friend to come up and investigate. He thought I was zoned out on TV, but I was listening. He said, I'm telling you, there was a knock like someone was knocking on the window to be let in, but there was no footprints. It's still scary and I'm in my late 30s now. Our 2 normally placid black Labradors woke me up. My bedroom was on the ground floor, making an awful growly barking sound I've never heard them make with real aggression and fear in it. We lived in the countryside with a huge common and woods out the back of the house. I went into the kitchen and they were glaring at the back door and making a big fuss. This made my hair stand in end and their obvious terror communicated itself to me. I grabbed a torch and steeled myself, thinking maybe it was an intruder, and armed myself with a fire poker and opened the back door. It was pitch dark and as I opened the door both dogs shied away and ran right to the other room. I poked my head and the torch out the back door and just for a split second I saw reflective eyes of a really large creature somewhere up the garden, maybe 10 meters away. They blinked as they turned away and they were gone. There is literally nothing in England that can account for this. I slammed the door shut and me and the dogs slept in my bedroom half terrified. The local paper shortly after that featured an article about some unexplained sheep deaths in a farm a mile away from ours. They had been ripped to shreds as if by a large predator.